we continue discussing current events in the unfolding reality of redemption and how we should and need to process what's happening in our world, knowing that the world is moving, that people are changing, and that redemption is unfolding. Please subscribe and share. I thought it was very powerful or interesting that we are doing this talk of the Rebbe on the world moving toward peace. And I was sort of sparked to do it, thinking of the war in the Ukraine and how do we properly process that. And then I thought, wow, today in our backyard, I mean, literally in Bella's backyard, but it sort of feels like in my backyard.
Yeah.
You know, for something like this to happen, I thought, okay, I'm really grateful that we're doing this talk of the Rebbe to give us a more transcendent perspective on how we're supposed to view what happens around us and how we should look at it and how we should understand, because it's very easy to get sucked into a very negative space, very, negative space in many ways. And that's why it's really good to hold very strong to reality. Reality is defined by God. Reality is defined by Torah. Reality is defined by God's words as they're given over to us, God's will and God's wisdom in the Torah. So when we look and we hear and we see, and it's terrifying, and it's like, wait, got to get a grip on reality. Grip on reality I'm not gonna get that from the news. For that, I have to go to Torah. And then when I look in Torah, then I can look back at what's happening in the world and process it within this paradigm. So that's why I thought it was very appropriate. And I hope our learning today the very fact of our learning should help enhance peace in the world, true peace, real healing. And that's what we accomplish as we study, as we bring God in this world. We're bringing peace in the world. We're bringing healing in the world. And that's what we should see as a result. Sometimes we can see things linearly, sometimes we cannot, but we should see that. So I am going to put a reminder up because I forgot to do that. And we said that this class is dedicated for a very nice, positive, wonderful thing, which is Hannah Goldschmidt's granddaughter's birth. And she was born, I believe, last night. And that's so nice that we should, be learning in a way that celebrates new life. And that's of course what we want. So her name is Chaya Edel Goldschmidt, and she should have a beautiful, long, healthy life. And our learning should help her as she starts on her journey. So we are, and everyone should be blessed. What better blessing than grandchildren, healthy grandchildren? Everyone should be blessed with their children and their grandchildren. We should all have much reason to celebrate. We should all sponsor many classes for all the beautiful good that we are going to be receiving. Thank God, with God's help. So we are in the middle of this talk that we did for 2 weeks. And then last week we took sort of a break because we spoke about the significance of the date, but what we spoke about actually very much dovetailed what we're learning in this talk. So it was really not moving away from it. So we're discussing here, this was in 1992. And in the UN that week, there was an amazing breakthrough. Never happened before, and I don't think ever happened since, which is that the heads of state themselves of all of the most significant countries in the world, all the countries of the Security Council, met in Manhattan in the UN headquarters to declare jointly a new era for the world, an era of disarmament, an era of cutting back on armament and using that money to support mankind. which the Rebbe identifies in this talk as the beginning of the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy, and they will beat their swords into plowshares. Now, we think beating swords into plowshares, like, okay, there's a sword and then someone hammers it or heats it up or bends it and now becomes a plowshare. The Rebbe says, well, what in the 21st century is beating swords into plowshares? Taking money that's supposed to go for weaponry and using it to feed the world. That's beating swords into plowshares. And why is this happening? Well, the Rebbe said we have to look at the time, the place, and the place in Torah, which is a very foundational concept that the Rebbe repeats very often, that everything has a time in Torah. And the Torah's basic timeline is the Torah portion of the week, what we call the Parsha. So, for example, this coming week, today, our Parsha is Chukas. We're going to read that in synagogue on Shabbos. We read it a little bit in Monday in synagogue, a little bit Thursday in synagogue, and the entirety on Shabbos in synagogue. But this entire week, from yesterday through Saturday, is the week of the Torah portion of Chukas. And that energy is affecting the entire week. So the Rebbe said, let's look at the coordinates, the time, the place, and the time in Parsha, in the Torah portion. And all of that's going to help us understand the significance, because people would say, it's all politics, it's all show, it's all for elections, it's all fake, it's all meaningless. The Rebbe says, no, these things are very significant. These things are very real. Well, why would these people merit to do something good? I mean, maybe they're not so good themselves, maybe not, but the hearts of kings are in the hand of God. When we see our leaders doing good things, that's what God wants them to do. When we see leaders doing horrible things, that's part of God's script. Now, of course, as we said, God uses good people as tools for good and the opposite. So when you see a leader doing something bad and waging war on innocent people, yes, it's God's script, but yes, an evil person has to be the one to carry out that script. As the Egyptians did God's plan on the Jews, but they had to be incredibly evil to be the ones that would do that plan, that God would choose to do that plan. That would be the appropriate vehicle to do that plan. And conversely, like we saw in America in prior years, some very good things were done to the Jewish people. Well, that tells us, even if we would think otherwise, that's a good person. Surprise, surprise. But God does good through good and bad through bad. But it's all coming from God. So when these kings, when these leaders of the world, our kings, elected or despots or inherited, they're the kings of the world. If they're choosing to come together and make this treaty, it's because God planted it in their hearts. But they're good people to be the ones chosen to do good. So what was the time and the place of the Torah portion then? Well, the day of the week was Friday, which ushers in Shabbos, and Shabbos is symbolic of the redemption of Moshiach. So that's a very good day for a treaty that begins the fulfillment of a messianic prophecy. An ancient messianic prophecy is being fulfilled in Manhattan. Makes sense, it's on a Friday. That's the day ushering in Shabbos, the millennium of Moshiach, of the redemption. It happened on the 26th of the month, of the Jewish month, which makes sense and reflects this energy because 26 is God's essence name. It's a numerical value of God's most holy name. And that's the name that will be apparent to all in the times of redemption. Now it's the name which gives existence to all. It's called the Hashem, the Shem Havaya, the ultimate name of God, the four-letter name, but it's the name that will be revealed by the redemption. So it makes sense that the day of the numerical value of that name is the day that this happened. So Friday makes sense. The date makes sense, the 26th, and the month makes perfect sense because the month was the month of Shvat, the Jewish month of Shvat. And why does the Rebbe say it makes so much sense that it was the month of Shvat? Because Shvat is the month of the leader of the generation. Now, when the Rebbe is talking, he never talks about himself. So when he says it's the month of the leader of the generation, he means his predecessor, his father-in-law. Well, why is Shvat his father-in-law's month? Because his father-in-law passed away in that month. And we know that a holy person, the day of their passing is the culmination of their life's work. And every year on the anniversary of the passing, what we call in Jewish the yahrzeit, and there is no such word in English. I don't know if such a word in Russian, there's no such word in English because In the American culture, that date doesn't really have a significance, but in the Jewish, it does. So on the yard site, on the anniversary of the passing, every single year, everything this holy, godly person, referred to as the tzaddik, accomplished, is shining in this world and creates salvation. And every year it's shining from a higher place and creates greater salvation. So this is the month of the passing of the previous Rebbe. This is the month of Rebbe. This is the month of Mashiach, because the Rebbe is Mashiach. So this is surely the month. And the date, 26, numerical value of God's essence name, which will shine by Mashiach. And Friday, ushering in the 7th millennium, the Shabbos, the millennium of redemption of Mashiach, makes perfect sense. This messianic prophecy is going to be fulfilled beginning on such a day. Now, of course, the Rebbe does not bring himself in at all, but we look at it as a month of Rebbe, not only because of his predecessor's passing, but because it's the day when the current Rebbe began his leadership. And from both levels, it's a doubly power month of Rebbe, month of Mashiach, as each of them, of course, embody the Mashiach of their times, and therefore an enormous power to create redemption in the world, which the Rebbe is saying this treaty is beginning. So we see time, Friday, 26, Shvat, all lines up, one line, the line of redemption. That was the time. The Rebbe says similarly the place. The place was Manhattan. Well, what does Manhattan have to do with redemption? We might not realize. We probably never did. But the Rebbe says, what are you talking about? Manhattan? That's the same city as the synagogue and study hall of the leader of the generation, of the Mashiach of the generation. That's the city and study hall called 770, which of course was the synagogue and study hall of his predecessor, who the Rebbe is referring to as the leader of the generation, who the Rebbe is referring to as the Mashiach of the generation, and of course has continued through him. So Manhattan, hey, this is one of the 5 boroughs. This is all the same. Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, it's all one city. It's New York. So of course in Manhattan this happened. So if we look in the time, we see redemption. Friday, the 26th, Shvat, redemption, redemption, redemption. If we look in the place, we see same thing, redemption, because it's New York. 770 is in New York. The UN's in New York. From 770, the Rebbe says, comes forth this energy of redemption, which means this energy of peace, which is, of course, then reaching Manhattan, and from there is going to impact the world in a secular way, as from 770 in Brooklyn, it's impacting the world in a spiritual way. And the Rebbe says this, we see the most ultimate example of this in the transformation going on in Russia. Like, how did that happen? The Rebbe says from energy coming from 770, the energy of redemption and spreading and changing the world. So that was time, place. The third coordinate that we're just about to study now, we have not yet begun it, so we don't know anything about it yet, is the place in the Torah portion. So that week that the Rebbe was speaking, the Torah portion was called Mishpatim. Mishpatim is a Torah portion in the second book, in the book of Shmos, and the book of Exodus. And it's amazing, because nothing is random, how that Torah portion so much links to this concept of the nations of the world gathering together to say, we want disarmament. We want to take that money and put it to feed humanity. We want peace. What does that have to do with the Torah portion? Well, let me first explain to you what the term mishpatim means, and then we'll go into the Rebbe's explanation and connection, which is amazing and very relevant for all of us. Mishpatim is a certain type of commandments. The commandments actually break down into 3 categories called eidos, chukim, and mishpatim. Eidos are testimonial laws. Like, for example, keeping the Sabbath, the Shabbos. Why do we keep the Shabbos? It's testimony that God created the world and took us out of Egypt. So that's commemorating something, as is Passover, as is Sukkot. It's commemorations. Shavuot, commemorations, eidos. Then we have chukim. A chok means a law that human mind would never dream up. Unfathomable to the human mind, like the laws of kosher, like the laws of shatnez, cannot mix wool and linen. Why not? Because God said so. Because God said so. Can't mix milk and meat. Why not? Because God said so. and myriads and myriads and myriads of such laws that are not something where, the Torah portion actually, that we have this comment that this week that we live in is Chukas, which begins with the laws of the red heifer. Classical example of something that we don't understand at all. So we have laws that are testimonies, like the Sabbath, like the holidays. We have laws that are inexplicable to the human mind, chukim, and then we have mishpatim, which is the Torah portion that we're discussing in this talk. That was that Shabbos. So what's a mishpat? A mishpat is what could be termed a civil law. Like don't steal, like don't kill, laws that make sense to us. Don't kidnap, don't lie, don't gossip, give charity. All of those things are perfectly rational. All of those things any moral non-Jewish society should come up with equally. It just makes sense that that's the best way to conduct a moral, humane, just, and society where people can live, where life can flourish, where people can be safe. So we have this whole category of laws called mishpatim, which are the rational laws, the laws that make sense to us. So again, we are talking about this peace treaty, this breakthrough peace treaty, when the heads of state personally all schlepped to Manhattan. So Bush had to come from Washington. Yeltsin had to come from Russia. They all had to come to Manhattan to give their power as literally, it's not enough an ambassador. The leaders of the countries are saying, we are putting our stamp of approval that we want disarmament. We want humanity to flourish. We want peace. And again, we said the time, Friday, 26 Shvat, redemption, redemption, redemption. Manhattan, redemption. And now we're looking at this Torah portion, Mishpatim. So now we explained what Mishpatim is about. It is about civil laws, rational laws, laws that our sages say, you can learn many of them from if God didn't command us, we could learn from the ant's integrity. We could learn from the cat's cleanliness. We could learn from the world around us, many of these concepts. Laws that we might find similar laws among the non-Jews, even though we're told that the non-Jewish law has nothing to do with our law, though it looks very, very, very similar. Now, when we approach these laws, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't gossip, don't be jealous, don't badmouth someone, give charity. When we approach these laws, how are we supposed to look at them? We could say, well, they make sense. Yeah, my mind says that too. And my Greek neighbor and my Mexican neighbor, they all also would all, at least in theory, agree to all of this stuff. So that's probably how we approach it. No, that's not how we approach it. As the law is that if you have a court case and the non-Jewish court, the country you live in, they rule exactly the same way the Jewish courts would rule, you are forbidden to go to those non-Jewish courts over this issue because it's not the same at all. This comes from God. That's man-made. But God and man thought of the same thing. Not at all. And we're going to discuss that now on two levels. On one level, which is very relevant to our own service, and on another level, that's really profound and really an innovation of this talk, a very profound innovation. So the first level of understanding this, which is not an innovation of the talk, but it's very good to know as one who wants to connect to God, is that when we look at these civil, rational laws, the ones I have and my Greek neighbors have and my Mexican neighbors have, I have to know that's got nothing to do with these laws. These laws are not coming from the brain of man. These laws are coming from God. And I have a mandate, I have a responsibility to approach these laws with the same nullification as I would approach, can't use a mixture of wool and linen. Makes no sense to me. Why do I do it? Because it's God's will. Having mezuzahs on the doorpost of my house. Why do I do it? Because it's God's will. Don't do hundreds of thousands of things on Shabbos. Why? Because it's God's will. Can I rationally defend it? I don't have to rationally defend it. It's God's will. That's how I'm supposed to approach. Don't steal and don't lie and don't be jealous and don't gossip and give charity. Why am I supposed to give charity? Because it's God's will. Why am I not allowed to gossip? Because it's God's will. Why should I not say that something that's not 100% or 1,000% truthful? Because it's God's will. Meaning, even things that make seemingly complete sense to us, we really are clueless. Because they're far beyond anything that makes sense to us. So therefore, every single thing I do for God, I have to have that same headspace. I keep Shabbos because that's what God wants. Well, you think on my own I would choose to do it? We circumcise because that's what God wants. We wouldn't think of that one on our own either. And we don't gossip because that's what God wants. We wouldn't think of this either. Well, we would. No, we wouldn't. Because the real depth of what we're fulfilling by doing this is way beyond anything a human ever could fathom. So this is a very practical perspective for all of us, because probably most of us keep these laws, at least we try to keep these laws, and we understand that this is God's will, and we also understand it makes sense. I would think I shouldn't lie, and God also doesn't want me to lie, so when I'm not lying, I'm serving God, and also I would understand it's a wrong thing. No, I've got to rewire my thinking. My thinking has to be, there's a God. Inexplicable to me. Nothing about him can I ever possibly fathom, because he's creator, I'm creation. He's infinite and I'm finite. His thoughts are nothing like mine. And he inexplicably willed that I shouldn't gossip. And that's why I don't gossip. And that is the first level of understanding how we approach these simple, rational laws called mishpatim. And that is not an innovation of this talk, and that doesn't have much to do with what we're talking about in the body of this talk. But it is, I thought, a very practical idea, and that's why I want to explain it. And now the Rebbe is going to give a second understanding. And this second understanding has a lot to do with what we're talking about, and is a tremendous innovation of this talk. To probe further, to go a little deeper on this, the Rebbe says, do you know why mishpatim are rational? Do you know why these rational laws are rational? Because God gave us a Torah. The Torah is called the blueprint of the world. And in this blueprint of the world, in the Torah, God created rational laws. And every one of those rational laws has become embedded in our minds, has molded the way we think. And that's why a Jew naturally thinks along these lines. Meaning, if God didn't say in his Torah that preceded creation, the world has existed for 5,782 years. And before that, there was a Torah that was the world's blueprints. And the blueprint of the world, God declared that do not steal, and that will be rational. Do not kill, and that will be rational. Do not commit adultery, and that will be rational. And because that's what's given in Torah, that's how a Jewish mind thinks. So Jewish minds naturally are in sync with Torah. And all of us naturally can understand that value system. But something very cool has happened, because the Torah was given 3,300 plus years ago. So for 3,300 some years, we, in our previous lifetimes, our ancestors and ancestors and ancestors, in an unbroken chain going back to the giving of the Torah 3,334 years ago, we are direct descendants of those people, and we actually are those people in our previous incarnation. We have been living, breathing, studying these words, these directives. And the Rebbe said, you know what happens when Jews for 3,300 years breathe and study and talk and live don't kill and don't steal and don't commit adultery and be moral and be ethical and be kind, and it penetrates the world. So drop by drop, the world around us that started off so far from this value system has moved and moved and moved. So these ideas now make sense in the minds of the nations of the world. What the Rebbe is saying here is we might view it as very counterintuitive, or we wouldn't realize this at all historically. Because most of us might say, oh, the world is such a corrupt place. People are far worse than they ever were. Based on what the Rebbe is saying, not at all. Not at all. People used to be a lot worse. People used to be far worse. If you're just looking at what the Rebbe is saying and thinking what this means in a realistic sense, the Rebbe is saying realistically 3,340 years ago, and for some 2,000 years prior to that, nobody in the world thought these things were a problem. They had no problem doing any of these things. They freely stole and took people's wealth. I did many corrupt, horrible things, and it was like, why not? If I can be the bigger bully on the block, why not? If I can get away with it, why not? And then Torah was given to the world. Well, Torah was given to the Jewish people, but Torah was also given to the world. But the world doesn't really know about Torah. We know about Torah. But as we learn it and live it, think of, like we always speak about Rabbi Akiva's rock and the drops and the drops and the drops. The people of the world, very little bit by little bit by little bit, start changing. Obviously, the first people to change are the most refined people in the world. And then it creeps a little more into some of the lower levels, and more and more. So the Rebbe is saying, when we look at the world around us, by the way, the people in the world are far better than they ever were in the past. Now, obviously, we can look around and see people going crazy, and they are. Oh, we can see people doing horrible things, and they are. But the general moral tone of the world, the Rebbe says, is completely different than it ever was before, and it's a lot better. It's a lot better because the world is affected by us, by our morality, which is Torah's morality, which became naturally our morality. And after 3,300 some years is becoming the world's morality. And I think this point, like I'm just thinking now, a very, simple example. So the Rebbe here is talking about this peace treaty, right? Where the nations are saying, oh no, fighting's wrong. Well, the Rebbe is going to discuss at length this, like, really? That's a big innovation. People didn't used to think that. But I don't want to go ahead of myself and say what the Rebbe was going to say, but we could just look very historically, very simple fact. Until very recent times, all the nations felt it was completely legit to do whatever you could get away with. I mean, think of imperialism, right? So assuming you learned about imperialism also in Russia. So the whole concept of imperialism means if I could conquer someone and get away with it, of course I'm going for it. If I can control other people, of course. If I can make them subservient to me, of course. That whole 1800s mindset, that wasn't so long ago. That wasn't so long ago. We're talking literally the 1800s, and it stretched into the 1900s. The world, huge masses of the world were under the control of a country called England, and a country, and this country, and this country, and all these countries controlled all these other countries. Why not? If I'm stronger, if I conquer, if they're under me and I take their money and take their resources, like, why not? If I can do it, if I can get away with it, if I can be a bully over them, why not? Who's going to stop me? Everyone's doing that. That was the mindset of the world. And I'm saying literally imperialism existed in the 1900s. I don't know when India stopped being a British colony, right? England gave up Israel. under tremendous duress in the 1940s, right? So we're not talking so long ago that the world thought that was completely legitimate behavior. Why not? If I can bully you, if I can aggressively take you over, if I can control you, more power to me. Nowadays, that's not acceptable. Nowadays, the world says, that's wrong. What do you mean you're attacking an innocent country? Now, you could say, oh, the world is saying that now with Ukraine because they're also worried about themselves or they're using it for political motives. That might be true for many, but there's many people in the world that are like, how dare you just attack a country? How are you allowed to do that? Sorry. Well, my battery. Well, what do you mean how are you allowed to do it? Because they're stronger, because they've got more weapons, because they've got a bigger army. So what? How are you allowed to do that? How are you allowed to aggressively stomp on another country? Right? When Iraq invaded Kuwait, the world said, you're not allowed to do that. Since when? What do you mean you're not allowed to do that? Why not? The world says, we don't accept that anymore. We don't know. That's not how we think. We don't think that's right anymore. So the Rebbe is saying, the world has changed in front of your eyes and you didn't even realize. Yes, you could get stuck and see a lot of things that seem really off, and they are. But if you look at the broad strokes of what the world's accepting as moral, appropriate behavior, the world has shifted so dramatically and we didn't even notice. The world has changed so much, and we it's sort of like the news. Like I always say, the most depressing thing on television is the news. The most dangerous thing to watch on television is the news. Truly, it sounds like a joke. It's not really a joke. It really is the most depressing and dangerous thing to watch, because they skew everything and make everything look horrible. Because that's going to, like, think of COVID, They just have to keep getting you back and get more views and more views and more views. So whatever they can do to catastrophize a situation, that's what they're going to do, because that gets viewers. So when we look at the world through the prism of the media, that's a very distorted reality. Now, of course, coming from COVID, we all know that now, that if you really want to see distorted reality, you go to the media, and you're definitely not going to find truth there. But we didn't usually realize it as clearly. But it's always been a distorted reality. It's always been a what can we say to get viewers to be hooked in, and by this very base instinct of fear. But the Rebbe says, but that's not really what's going on in the world. But it's very interesting, because in this talk, so here's the Rebbe, we've got this war now in the Ukraine, and we have this horrible thing that happened in Highland Park. And the Rebbe in this talk, as of course we're going to continue, is promoting that people have changed. The world looks at things differently. So I think this came out in 2000. The Rebbe said this in 1992. I believe it was in 2010. I didn't look it up, but I can. There was a think tank, meaning an independent body of thinkers that were commissioned by like 5 different countries to study war in the world, to study conflict in the world. That was the term, to study conflict. So under conflict are wars between countries. Under conflict is civil unrest, civil wars. Under conflict is terrorism. So they were commissioned to study the world in terms of wars, in terms of terrorism, in terms of civil wars. And they were supposed to be figuring out what are the patterns and what's happening and where are we going. And this was, I believe this was commissioned in 2010. And when they started, obviously everyone knew that they're going to find that everything is horrible and falling apart and getting worse and worse and worse and worse. I mean, you don't have to be, this high degree person in a think tank to know that. We all know that. But the weird, unbelievable thing is that that's not what they found. That's not what they found. What they found actually is that year after year after year, globally, if we study the world is moving toward peace. And on every single level that they studied, terrorism, wars, and civil wars, on every single level, they saw that the world is moving toward peace. And they were very surprised because they didn't think that easier, because they also watched the news. But when they actually chewed down the statistics, that's actually what they saw. And they were so surprised, and they had to like postulate, well, what's going on? How is this happening? How is it that the world is moving toward peace? We didn't think that was happening. We were sure that wasn't happening. We were sure we were going to find the world is falling apart at a very fast rate, at a spiraling rate. We didn't at all expect to find that the world's actually getting better. And they came up, and again, this was totally secular study. As I said, a think tank, definitely not people that read this talk of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. They came up with 3 reasons, 3 theories, 3 hypotheses, what is happening to the world that it's actually, in terms of wars, in terms of civil war unrest, and in terms of terrorism. In every one of these 3 areas, the numbers are going down, down, down. I think like in sub-Saharan Africa, which was like the hotbed of violence of the whole world. Now we don't hear about sub-Saharan Africa because the media likes to focus on the poor Palestinians suffering in Israel. But actually, in sub-Saharan Africa, where a lot more people were dying, the rate of death from civil unrest over the years they studied literally dropped by 90%. 90%. And so too in every other area they looked at. And they came up with 3 hypotheses, 3 theories, what in the world is happening, that the world is actually going to good. So one of the 3 hypotheses is actually exactly what the Rebbe is going to say in this talk. I'm sorry, I misquoted the date. This first came out in 2005. If you could Google it. It's the think tank is called the Human Security Center. And they issued in 2005 the Human Security Report, War and Peace in the 21st Century. So it was funded by 5 governments. It took them 3 years to produce, and they tracked and analyzed trends in political violence around the world. And they write there, literally they write there, that their findings are completely at odds with conventional wisdom. And most forms of political violence have declined significantly. And it's like, whoa, we wouldn't think this. They didn't think it either. But when they actually study it, 3 years they studied this, that's what they found. And again, they have 3 explanations. They give 3 hypotheses. And one of them is that there is a gradual normative shift against the use of violence in human relations. For example, the outlawing of war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, making genocide a crime. So there are now anti-violence norms in the world. And those anti-violence norms play a very important role in constraining behavior. The world is looking at this as wrong. So people shape up because it's no longer socially acceptable. And that's why people create institutions to help enforce compliance with these anti-violence norms. And that's why we have something like the UN. So when the UN is involved in conflict prevention, in peace building activities, in resolution, that's expressing truly the new norm, truly how the world has shifted. Now, the first time the world realized this was 2005, with this think tank in 2005. The Rebbe is saying this here in 1992. So when we're looking at the world around us and we're saying it's a scary, terrifying place and horrible things are happening, and where can I hide? Give me a good rock to crawl under. The Rebbe says, no, you don't get it. You don't get it. You're seeing things that are real, and we're not taking away the reality, and we're not taking away the pain, and we're not taking away the tragedy. They're all real. But if you look at the whole world, that's not the world. And even looking at how the world reacts to these things, as I'm saying, how the world has reacted and is reacting to what's going on in the Ukraine. The Rebbe famously in 1992 was focused on Bosnia and Sarajevo in the conflict between those two countries. And the Rebbe speaks there very clearly, this exact same, the Rebbe doesn't say these words, but the Rebbe's perspective is exactly the same. The Rebbe says, why does America get involved? Why did America take their Air Force to airlift clothing and food and medical supplies? Like, was there any political gain? They don't know these people. They're not related to these people. They don't need these people. They don't need one side to like them. And they were doing it for people on both sides. They were doing it for the starving, unfortunate people that were being horribly victimized by the war. Why were they doing it? Rebbe says, because they're nice people. Because when people of America saw on their TV screens what was going on, they said, we have to help. That's not what it was like in previous wars. We know that. The world didn't stand up and say, we have to help the Jews. You could say the world didn't know. A lot of people in the world knew. A lot of people that had the power to help knew. And none of their hearts said, we have to go help the Jews. You could say, well, because it's Jews and there's natural anti-Semitism, that could be a factor. But it still doesn't explain the world allowing these atrocities to happen as callously as they did. When America was begged to bomb the tracks leading to Auschwitz, they knew exactly what was going on. Not the common soldiers, but the government knew what was going on. And they were begged to bomb the tracks going to Auschwitz. They refused. No, too much into foreign territory. No, we don't do that. Nothing to do with us. So suddenly in 1992, where our hearts are bleeding over the people in Bosnia and Sarajevo, yeah, because the world changed. Because the world has changed very, very rapidly and dramatically. So we're of course, not done this at all, but just to understand the perspective here. And the Rebbe says this movement is, again, you can see this is definitely the perspective of the Rebbe in this talk, is changing the world. Now, of course, it's important to change the Jews. We also need help and need to grow. But the Rebbe says Jews naturally are like this. Jews are naturally thinking along the lines of Torah, and we always have. And that's why the Jewish people have always been, again, obviously we've had individuals that fall short, but as a nation, we've always been moral, we've always been ethical, we've always been different than the world around us. The famous essay from Mark Twain that I'm sure many of you have read. If you haven't, it's worth reading. I'm sure you could Google it. Describing what is the Jew. And Mark Twain knew there weren't that many Jews even around in America then. Enough for him to see what is the caliber of a Jew. So that was always obvious. We were always different. But the Rebbe now is making this point, but now the world is getting there as well. Why is the world shifting? Again, mishpatim, because God in the blueprints of the world embedded what is moral, rational, ethical life. And we've been believing it, living it, knowing it for 3,300 plus years. And gradually, the world around us has been perfumed by that. It's trickled into the world. And therefore, the average non-Jew in the world thinks along very good, healthy, moral lines. And because that's how the world thinks, the world's perspective on war has shifted. And the Rebbe says this is moving to Moshiach. Because by the redemption, it's not just for the Jews. Redemption isn't only for Jews. All of the non-Jews are going to be part of the redemption. There'll be no more evil. When Maimonides describes that by Mashiach, the entire world is going to be full of knowledge of God, he's not just talking about the Jews. He means the entire world. He means the 8 billion of mankind. All the Jews. And of course, there'll be the resurrection. So gradually, we can't even imagine how many Jews there will be, because now there's 15 plus million of us. And imagine when there's a resurrection and everyone gets up eventually. But there's 8 billion human beings in this world. And all of those 8 billion people are going to want to know God. So just as now, natural, mishpatim, ethical, civil, rational laws has become the norm in the minds of the world, by Mashiach, knowledge of God will be the norm in mankind's vision, not just in the Jewish people's vision, in the entire world's vision. The Rebbe speaks here about the whole idea of being a Noachite, right? A Noachite is a non-Jew who wants to serve God, who believes in God, who doesn't believe in any man-made religions like Christianity or Islam. Says they're all man-made. He believes in God. And he knows that the non-Jew has a place in serving God. And why is he so, if you look at the laws of the non-Jew, the Noachide laws, they're all very rational. They're all completely rational. They could have been any nice, good person should be doing all this stuff anyway. Don't murder, don't commit immorality, don't steal, don't be cruel to animals, don't profane God's name in your words. I mean, all these things are so rational. So every good human being you'd imagine already does them. But we're told that's not enough. Every good human being probably does most of them. But he has to do them because he knows there's a God. And because he knows God commanded. And not because I know it's wrong to steal, am I not stealing? But I know there's a God and he told me not to steal. And that's why I don't steal. Not because I know it's wrong, do I not blaspheme? But there's a God and he told me I'm not allowed to, and that's why I don't. So the Rebbe is saying that it used to be this was so far from mankind's mind. And the fact that there were Noachites in the past is unbelievable. And there were a few. Unbelievable. There were a few, but it was unbelievable because it was not where the world was holding. But now this is where the world is holding. Now these things make sense to the world. Now the world thinks along these lines. So now you just need that little extra step of saying, don't do it because it makes sense to you. Do it because God said. And that's why there's a plethora of Noachites all over the world. All over the world, there's Noachites. It's amazing to me because I give this class to Noachites once a week, and like every week there's different people on it. I wish they would all keep coming back, but this one. From Kenya, I had a woman, I had Japan, Philippines, all over the world, from Greenland. I mean, all over the world, all these people are waking up and taking the next step and saying, yeah, of course, it's wrong to steal, but I'm doing it because God said it's wrong to steal. I want to serve God. I'm a Noachite. And the Rebbe said, and the next step after, so the first step, which took us 3,300 some years, is to get the world to think along the lines of Torah's morality, of Jewish morality. The next step is, don't do it because it makes sense to you. Do it because God said. That's a Noachite. And that's completely different. A moral non-Jew and a Noachite are completely different. And the step after that is the step we're going to experience by the redemption, where the entire world and all the non-Jews of the world will all have one desire: to understand God. And unbelievably, they will. That's going to happen for the entire world by the redemption. Bella wants to say hi. Don't ask.
Hi.
July 4th, so to speak, barbecue. So, yeah, Rachel. Who else do you see? Rivka, Bella, Chava. Yeah, it's not a touch screen. He's used to touch. He's thinking he can touch and it can move. Those are all the people. Everybody else just shows black screens. These are the people that show their faces. So we should really, we're going to continue to talk, of course. Chava. Yeah. Maybe you've inspired people to go to turn on their faces so everybody could get Beryl's warm hello.
Hi, sweetie.
Hi, Rivka.
Hi, Piero. Hello.
Hi. And he should be sleeping, but oh well. So we're going to end at this point. Chava, yeah. Chava Chava hears you. Chava hears you. She's waving.
Hi, Beryl. Hello.
He said, how are
Good.
you?
How are you?
How are you, Beryl?
Baruch Hashem.
How are you?
Good.
Good, Baruch. Baruch Hashem. All right. He said, Rachel. You were the first person you said hi to was Rachel. And Bella. That's Rachel. Yes, that's Rachel.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. He always thinks it's everyone's birthday. Rachel's going to say hi to you.
Yeah, happy birthday.
Hello, hi. How are you?
Good. Happy birthday.
He thinks it's your birthday, Rachel. So it must be your birthday on some level.
I think
Soon.
he is right. We're
Yeah.
celebrating birthday of Chaya.
Happy birthday.
All right. I'll take it. He knows what he's talking about. We should share good news. We should share good news. Have a wonderful week. Look around the world. That's Vega. We should see around the world and know it's a lot better than we think. Vega's saying, hi, Beryl.
Africa.
You know, honestly, just speaking about this idea of the better world, I'm looking at Beryl. You could Google this, is all facts. Unfortunately, as I'm sure you probably know, you don't have to go back so many years. That's Menucha, where special needs children were institutionalized, right? They were just institutionalized, and yeah, that's Bella, and the life, and that's Menucha. Wait, bro, I just want to finish this point. You reminded me of something I want to show the people. I don't remember the life expectancy for a special needs child was so young. They passed away so young because that's how the world treated them and that's what happened to them. I'm saying I don't remember, but it was like something like in their 20s. Horrible. And it wasn't so long ago. It literally was, yeah, huh? It wasn't so long ago. And you look at how the world has shifted. That's Menucha. And that's Vega. How the world has shifted, how the world is and inclusion, how the world says, of course we have to take care of these people. Of course we have to treat them and give them everything we can to treat them equally. That's such a shift you cannot imagine. And if you just do a little research on Google, you can appreciate what I'm saying, that the world has completely changed very rapidly. He decided he shouldn't see me anymore. How the world has changed so fast, literally in the last 30 seconds. All right, he doesn't want you to see me anymore. Have a wonderful week, a week of looking at the world and seeing good, and to be continued. Thank you for joining.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.